Okay, good. I can see where to mute myself, where to unmute myself.
Hello, this is Anna. Can you hear me?
Yep, yep.
Hello?
Hi, Nana.
Hi, cool.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I
Yeah.
can.
Okay, I'm going to start off with giving Matt control. I want to see if you can move the slides on your own. So you should have a pop-up screen that says accept controls.
Your screen. I don't see accept control.
Okay.
I mean,
Hello, this is Robert. Can you hear me?
Hi, Robert. We can hear you.
Oh, great.
you know what? I'm okay if you can just, I can just say next slide and you can advance for me. It's fine.
Same here.
Okay, if that works with everyone else, then we can plan on doing that. So for today's presentation order, I have Matt and Lewis going first, then I have Robert, Nina, and Cecilia last.
Sounds good.
That's about it. Although Matt and I will be switched in order. I'll be starting, and then Matt will finish up with the last two slides.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep.
So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the People Living with HIV Personal and Collective Empowerment webinar. This is the first webinar from a series of webinars that NMAC will host for the HIV 50 Plus program. So today's presenters, we have Matt Sharp and Louis, from the Reunion Project. We have Robert Suttle from the Sero Project, Naina Khanna from Positive Women's Network, and Cecilia Chung from Positively Trans. So on today's webinar, we will learn from these presenters on some of the most consequential programs in the HIV field. So a little housekeeping rules before we go ahead and get started. On the right of the screen, you should see a GoToWebinar panel. Please dial in using a phone. Sometimes we get some bad feedback when people dial in using their computer speakers. There's an access code and an audio pin that's different for each participant. When you join the webinar, your microphones were automatically muted to reduce background noise. There will be an opportunity at the end for you to ask questions, but we also do have a chat and question box window in case you want to use those as well. So again, during the webinar, feel free to ask questions by using the question option or chat option. My colleague, Sable Nelson, will be monitoring the questions and chat box. So at the end of the webinar, a screen should pop up that will prompt you to complete an evaluation. So please complete the evaluation at this time, or if you would like to complete it at a different time, a follow-up email will be sent. All right, with this being said, I will turn it over to our first presenters, Louis and Matt from the Reunion Project.
Good morning, everybody. This is Louis Spraggins coming to you from Chicago, Illinois as part of the Reunion Project. And I'll be starting off our presentation this morning, and Matt will be finishing up. One moment. I'm actually having trouble seeing your screen. So I'm going to trust that we are on the first slide and just begin by telling you all about the Reunion Project. So I'm very happy to be presenting to you all today, or sharing more information about the Reunion Project. It's a really wonderful initiative and organization that began in 2015, and it began in a very organic manner. Matt Sharp, Jeff Berry, Jeff Taylor, and a few other long-term survivors and lifetime activists centered around HIV and AIDS actually began to notice some commonalities in their lives and in the lives of their peers. And so they began to look at some common life experiences, some negative common life experiences that they were noticing in the lives of folks who were long-term survivors of HIV, specifically those who were aging into the age of 50 and beyond. And so with that being said, Matt and Jeff and a group of others began to go in and they talked to a few people. So it began in an organic way. They had connections from all of their previous work. You can actually move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. They began to talk to all of their connections from all of their work throughout the years. And one of their connections with BMS, or Bristol Myers Squibb, actually listened to them and felt that they had caught on to something that was very important. So they provided a bit of funding, and together with that funding and with TPAN serving as the fiscal agent, the Reunion Project began. It began as a very grassroots and grounded effort. Basically, they began to gather information by talking to folks all around the country. They started off with a town hall model. And so what they did was they came together in a couple of cities and provided a very safe space, a space where folks would come together as long-term survivors and be themselves and talk about the things that they had experienced up until this point, and the things that they were experiencing now in their 50s and older as they were beginning to age with HIV, many of them unexpectedly so. And so there ended up being a lot of things that were identified that were common negative experiences or life experiences that many were sharing. And so this actually led to more town halls, or rather more healing sessions is what I like to call them, in which the Reunion Project was leading efforts to create safer spaces for people to come together and talk about those issues, bring them to light, and then begin to hopefully work together to solve those issues or to provide more community to deal with the issues of isolation, self-imposed isolation, as well as isolation imposed by the community around them, isolation from stigma surrounding HIV over the many years of dealing with HIV. And so we did our best to provide many safe spaces for people to reunite, initiate discussion, mobilize, and organize for today. You can actually go to the next slide, and on the next slide you can see some of the pictures from all of the events that we had over the last few years. We began in 2015. We're still going now. Personally, I can give you my little anecdote that when the project began, I was personally going through my own period of self-isolation, feeling disempowered after having become a very, well, not a super well-known, but a well enough known advocate. And I had been reached out to while the Reunion Project was having one of the first events here in Chicago. I did not participate then, but fortunately, as the Reunion Project is about making sure we continue to reach out to each other and build a community, they continued to reach out to me, and a year later, I was brought in along with Wahida El-Shabazz and others as we look to expand intentionally the diversity of the representation of the Reunion Project. And so from the beginning, this has been something that we paid a lot of attention to.
So, Louis,
Matt?
can I just go over these photographs really quickly?
Sure, go ahead, jump in there.
So just quickly, I want to show on the top left side, you'll see the Chicago. That was our first reunion project in Chicago. And then I just want to walk through these photographs. In the middle is a picture of our Atlanta reunion project, which was held about a year later. On the lower right is a photograph of our South Florida event. And then on the lower left, you see with the sister there and Jeff Taylor and others in that photograph, that is from Seattle. And also the top right is a picture of Tranisha from Seattle as well. So I just wanted to let you know what those photographs were. So this is sort of
we've had a total of 6 of these sessions, and I must say that they have been very healing. Go ahead, Matt.
These are just that I just want to show these photographs here to represent a few. We have a lot more, but we didn't want to waste time on a lot of photographs. So next slide.
And so actually Matt's going to run into a few more of the highlights for us and things that we've done over the last 3 years. Go ahead, Matty.
So thank you, Louis. So in addition to the town hall, we also have presented at the USCA. Many of you have been to those conferences, to that conference over the last several years, where we've been accepted with abstract presentations and sessions and workshops and receptions, and they're all very well attended and really helping us to build the movement of survivorship. And then in March 2018, we decided that we wanted to try to be really intentional in creating an opportunity for a roundtable discussion to really start creating a framework for survival. And what did that mean? That means to really sort of identify specific areas in a representative population of survivors that attended that meeting in Rancho Mirage, California, to really sit down for a 2-day meeting and really unpack all of the issues that surround survivors and identify the most important that the people at that meeting felt should be paid attention to. And out of that meeting, there's a report that I'll show you on the next page. If we can go ahead and there's a slide. So the top photograph there is the roundtable meeting attendees, and there's two papers that have been written around survivorship issues. The one on the bottom right is the framework paper that we wrote as a result of the roundtable meeting. The paper on the left, Unintended Consequences of AIDS Survival, is basically a white paper, evidence-based report of all of the issues surrounding survival from the beginning, from the first day of the epidemic and the first day of reported cases to today, and all the issues within. Next page. Next slide. So, Louis, I'll go ahead and go through these, and you feel free to chime in when you'd like to.
Julia.
So basically, we like to explain our how we operate, because there's a lot of questions around who we are and what we do and how we do it. We're a volunteer-based organization, grassroots, and we operate like a lot of organizations these days, virtually through the internet and through conference calls. We have a national steering committee that's comprised of about 8 people, and it's led by a management team, and we have standing conference calls in conjunction with the National Steering Committee retreats. We work on a consensus decision-making model, so it's not a formal decision-making process, but we make sure that everyone is comfortable with the decisions being made and can at least live with or continue to agree with the majority of the people. We're really working to be intentional about our programming and our diversity planning. So we're really working hard to try to ensure that survivors include and represent all of the survivors that are living today, so that it becomes a richer, fuller conversation, and that the services be met for everybody.
Yeah, and to that point, just if I can jump in for a second, one of the things that we're doing intentionally is we're trying to make sure that we expand the network and clarify the network by looking to work with groups whose voices are usually not heard or are underheard. So we're really doing our best to reach out and expand by including our transgender brothers and sisters, as well as immigrant populations. We ought to make sure that we're taking into account the populations that include Black heterosexual or African heterosexual men who are not drug users, so that their lives are not always just framed in the use of drugs. But we want to make sure we're hitting all of those populations who are being deeply affected by HIV, but are rarely at the table or have their voices heard when we're making decisions.
And the diversity plan also includes in our leaders as well. The leaders of this program, we're working very hard to bring in people of color and other people who are not typically included in our leadership.
That's been happening in a very organic manner. We've been talking through our social networks and through our organizing networks, through the work that we've been done. That's how Matt brought in myself and Wahida El-Shabazz and others as well. So we're hoping to continue expanding. And with that being said, everyone who's listening, if you're interested in getting involved, please contact us later on too. Go ahead, Maddie.
Sure. And finally, I'll just say the summits, the city summits that we involve local community leaders to create host committees, and the host committees develop a program for those town hall meetings where we go throughout the country. Let's go to the next slide. I believe, yeah, so here's a picture of the last retreat we had at the USCA conference in Florida. And the next slide.
Yes, it's as fun as it looks.
What'd you say?
I said, yes, it's as fun as it looks. To work with a bunch of other folks who have some of the same life experiences and different life experiences and bring everything together to make things better for all of us. Yeah, we were having a great time, even with all of the touchy subjects. Go ahead, Maddie.
It was a good day, definitely. So finally, to give you a little lay of the land for what our planning is for 2019 and beyond, we have 3 summits in the planning stage: Chicago, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and New Orleans for 2019. So we've got a lot of work cut out for us, but we're excited to be starting with Washington and Chicago, and then moving down to Los Angeles and New Orleans, and creating host committees and developing those programs. We've also extremely excited about receiving an award from Gilead to create a program called Positively Aging. This is a collaborative effort with Test Positive Aware Network and Positively Aware Magazine with a Reunion Project. And then finally, you know, really moving forward, wanting to build the organization. We want to build and establish our our basic organizational development, how we operate, and really identify more formal goals into what we do. And, you know, we're very, very excited and fortunate to work with JD Davids and Susan Wolfson to help us to create a stronger network of advocates and people who are survivors. And then, you know, as Lewis said before, we're really trying to be intentional to ensure diversity among the voices that are typically unheard. And, you know, this is going to be an intensive effort in moving forward into the future with really plans and goals to include as many people as possible that are survivors. We want to really clarify the structure of our national, what we're calling the National Survivorship Alliance, which is what we've already started it, but it's a very informal process, and we want to formalize the process of a survivorship alliance. Those people who are alive today and surviving into a network that can really communicate and press their issues.
Yeah, I think it's also the clarifying of the structure is also one of the more important parts that we want to take care of this year, because a lot of people continue to have questions around the structure, and some parts are clear, but other parts are still being solidified right now.
We want to identify and consider national advocacy issues that come up and other campaigns that most affect long-term survivors, policy issues, etc. And then we're going to really be working with this new Positively Aging project to try to identify a peer-led psychosocial support model that's really based around trauma-informed care. And so that's going to be moving forward with TPAN in the next 3 years. We have 3 years to do that. Then we're going to deepen our partnership with local, national, and issue-based groups moving forward. Next slide.
Hi, this is Joanna. Sorry, I have a question from Robert Reister. He would like to know if you can bring the Reunion Project to Denver.
Awesome.
We'll add it to the growing list, but yeah, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Let's talk about that, Robert.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so this is contact information. We have a Facebook group. You can sign on to that, and it's a moderated group. We have a Twitter account, we have a website, and we have email. You see it on this page.
Okay, thank you guys.
I think there's one more. Lewis, you want to?
Yeah, it's just we like to also point out that one of the reasons why it's so important for this to happen and why we're all moving forward the way we are is because by 2020, that's only a year, not even 2 years away, we expect that 70% of the people living with HIV will be over 50. 70% of the people in the U.S. will be over 50 years old. And so it really is important for us to get ahead of the wave and start preparing things as people are moving into this space, especially if we're going to be moving forward with these determined to get to zero campaigns and everything. That means there's going to be lots of people who are aging with HIV and hopefully fewer people who are becoming newly infected. But thank you for this time, and thanks for the opportunity to share the information about the Reunion Project.
Thank you.
Thank you. So up next, we have the Sero Project. Robert.
Yes. Good morning to some, and good morning and good afternoon to others. It's really glad to be here today to encourage those of you that are attending the webinar and serving in all sorts of capacities to highlight the important role of people living with HIV networks during this year's World AIDS Day commemorations. Next slide. Okay, so we're the Sero Project. Many of you are probably familiar with us through our work around HIV criminalization. We are a network of people living with HIV and allies fighting for freedom from stigma and injustice. Networks have always been important in our work since we've been in existence for since 2012, so 6 years. We're still a young organization, but recognizing that networks are as important today as they were in the earliest days of the epidemic. Networks, of course, are where we can ask questions of our peers, learn how and find the strength to disclose our HIV status when appropriate, and build self-empowerment critical to our survival. And so the Sero Project we fight against HIV-related stigma, discrimination, criminalization, and most people know us through our work around criminalization, but something that I want to highlight here is that we have always, since the beginning, have worked to support the strengthening and creation of people living with HIV networks. And next slide. And doing that by empathizing, engaging, and empowering people through educating, inspiring, connecting advocates, drawing, of course, public attention to the harmful effects of stigma, discrimination, and criminalization, and again, self-empowerment, helping people to know their power and their self-worth through, their identity as a person living with HIV. Next slide. And I just wanted to highlight that some of the impact that we've had is through our survivors network, connecting people who have faced or been threatened with prosecution, connecting those people so that what they understand that they have a shared or similar experience around criminalization. Same thing with our prisoners network, or as I like to call the incarcerated network of people living with HIV who are incarcerated but happen to be living with HIV, who have all sorts of issues just as we have them outside of prison. They have issues there around their health. And one success from that is that we've been able to produce this prison health guide, resource guide by people living with HIV who are incarcerated. It is their information, their content, their data. And so, and of course, through the HIV is Not a Crime from National Training Academy, hundreds of people living with HIV have come together and now established coalitions in their state and are doing work there on the ground. And the project that I'm highlighting today is the Network Empowerment Project, which may be new to some of you and or maybe familiar to others. Next slide. Okay, where are my notes? Okay, next slide. So this is our latest project, or another pillar of the work that we've been doing, although we've sort of started it through these other networks that I just sort of mentioned within Zero. But this is our main pillar of our work moving forward. The purpose was we created this through Zero to facilitate the creation and strengthening of networks of people living with HIV, whether the networks are focused on advocacy, education, recreation, provision of services, or for mutual social support. So it doesn't really matter, what it is. It could be something formal, something informal. It could be a group of people getting together, even one-on-one. Definitely recognize the power of one-on-one. It's definitely how I met Sean, for example. I didn't know anything about networks or even in regards to advocacy. And so just connecting with one person that was connected to networks really helped bring me in to realize there's a whole community out there waiting for me. And so as an example, it's been very helpful into getting me to this point in my diagnosis and advocacy. So networks of people living with HIV are where we can determine our own agenda, define our own priorities, select leadership of our own choosing, hold said leadership accountable, and speak with a collective voice. People living with HIV working together with other people living with HIV contributes significantly to improve the health outcomes and stigma reduction. And many of the networks are focused on specific state or regions. Several are national or global networks focused on specific populations, of course. And as you can see there on the slide, those that are represented. And so together we're working to make sure that people's voices are being heard. And let me just back up and say we started the Network Empowerment Project back in 2015, which I thought was interesting considering the Reunions Project started around the same time, which is great. And so we did a exploratory research, and the purpose was to identify existing people living with HIV networks, their leadership, and we found that the leadership and membership are predominantly we were looking for leadership and membership that was predominantly 75% or more people living with HIV and that were involved in advocacy. And so there were 20 questions of a survey that was sent out to all these group leaders, circulated through all our known national networks, followed with telephone interviews, and a sample of, based on the 239 responses, we got 71 that qualified, that pretty much met our definition and completed at least 60% of the survey. Next slide. Okay, sorry. So of those responded, you can see there on the map of all the national and regional networks that we were able to connect with. And the result is that there were networks. We found that there were networks at least in 27 states, which I think is wonderful. That's pretty much half of the country. And being that I'm from the South, I'm happy to see that there were that the South is definitely represented there in terms of networks, as well as in all the other regions of the country, from the east to west, and even central. 54% have local or statewide memberships. 38% of these national and regional networks are regional or national, and 8% did not indicate their membership area, or they were exclusively online. And some of us may be a part of some of those networks online. I know that I am a part of a few of them online. So as I said earlier, we exist. These networks exist in all sorts of forms, and that's great because it meets the needs of wherever people are and what they need, based on where they are with their diagnosis or where they are in their life. And I think that's the beauty of networks, is that it's not something that is sort of in a box, something that's already pre-made. It's whatever those group of people want to make of it. Next slide. So based on the survey, this is what these group leaders and their memberships told us what they want or that they need or would like from the Network Empowerment Project. And these were some of the major issues: funding and assistance in getting funding. And of course, a lot of us can relate to these things. They wanted a toolkit that provided templates and resource directories, help for networks to share skills and news and support each other in facing common problems, help coordinating advocacy on national issues such as HIV criminalization, and assistance connecting to people who are underserved or ignored by their local HIV groups. And so these were, again, the highlights of what the people wanted. And we are doing our best to organize that, so that when these resources are created or developed, or some of these issues are troubleshooted in a way that this work that's very effective, we're asking for people involved in those networks to share that information with us through the Network Empowerment Project, sort of a storehouse of that information, so that as groups organize or as groups come together, that there is a place, one-stop shop that they can go to and find that information that they know it's been tested and tried and is effective. And of course, you can customize that information however you need to. Next slide. And I just wanted to sort of show you how the Network Empowerment Project is organized in sort of buckets based on tools and building networks, issues and communities, advocacy, finding a network, whether it be global or national, even a state network, and of course, other resources and links. And so if you produce something that you think would be beneficial to the community at large, this is a great place to sort of store that so that everyone can see it and it can be shared. And the Network Empowerment Project is housed on our CERO website under U.S. I think it's excuse me, under PLHID networks. That's where it's housed at. And so if you haven't checked it out, please go there and check it out. This is something that's growing. This is something that's ongoing. It is not fully completed, but we're slowly building and organizing the information and the data there so that people can have access to it. Next slide. So the goal of the Network Empowerment Project is to support all such networks and make sure that those living with HIV who are newly diagnosed are provided the opportunity to connect with networks that can be most helpful to them in navigating stigma, isolation, fear, loneliness, so on and so forth, as well as with healthcare access. And through the Network Empowerment Project, we provide the guidance on forming and sustaining networks to how to work collectively to fundraise and agree on mission and more. And this is a quote from Sean that says that no one knows more about living with HIV than those of us who are doing precisely that. We want to use our collective experience and personal empathy and access to expertise to help every person living with HIV. And so that's the goal that, ultimately when those that are newly diagnosed come into the fold, they need somewhere to go. They need to know that there's some, and it's not so much just about a support group, but mainly where can they go to find information to meet their needs of where they are as a newly diagnosed person, or even someone that, may be further along in their diagnosis and just needs some information and guidance, like where can they find that? And we want to be that. We want to be able to provide that path for them through this project. Next slide. And this is another project that came out of the Network Empowerment Project. And if you have not seen it, this is a video that was just created through Ciro's Senior Song, PLHIV Networks Change Lives. And this is just a story that follows a young man in Mississippi and who's has been connected to the Mississippi Mississippians that are living with HIV. There's a network there. And it's a great video, and I was very moved being from the South and coming from Louisiana. I definitely connected with it, and I think you would find it very inspiring. And we're encouraging all people, organizations, to really share this video to show the value of connecting with a network and how networks can change lives. And as I said earlier, I'm a witness to that by connecting with someone who was connected to a network or a community when I wasn't, and it definitely has changed my life. And many of you have been able to witness that in terms of my advocacy. And so I know that if it worked for me, it definitely can work for someone else. And so I strongly encourage that. So there are other components to our project that we'll be rolling out definitely in 2019. We really, we've been talking about the importance of networks as a community, but we really want to move that needle to really focusing on individuals as well. And so meeting the needs of where they are and hopefully bringing them into the fold, and hopefully they will find self-empowerment and feel empowered and know their power as a person living with HIV in today's time. So next slide. So the sky's the limit for the Network Empowerment Project. We're, again, asking for individuals and networks to provide feedback, input about new networks, resources, topics, updates, or corrections, or anything that you think is a great idea. We welcome it all. And so you can send requests or comments to info@ciroproject.com. And thank you so much for this time to highlight this project. And please be on the lookout for other components of it as we roll out in 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. So up next, we have Nina from the Positive Women's Network.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good morning from Oakland, California, and good afternoon to those of you in other parts of the country. It's really great to hear from the other presenters and also speak to all of you on this World AIDS Day weekend, where we can really place the networks of people living with HIV as part of a historical legacy of people living with HIV, supporting each other and standing together to claim our power. And so I'm the executive director of Positive Women's Network USA. We are a national membership body of women and folks of trans experience living with HIV. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our approaches and how we work. So you can go to the next slide, please. So who are we? We're a national community of women and folks of trans experience living with HIV. Our mission is to prepare and involve all women living with HIV in all our diversity in all levels of policy and decision making. And so what we do is we mobilize folks to take action. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. You can go to the next slide, please. So I also want to sort of back up a little bit and build off of some of the comments Robert made, because I think they're so important. The power of networks is really, I think many of us have experienced it ourselves. I know for me, as a woman living with HIV, diagnosed in 2002, it took a while for me to find both sort of a political home and also mentorship and guidance and support from other folks that had a similar life experience to mine. And so we founded Positive Women's Network USA as a diverse group of 28 women living with HIV back in 2008. So we're about 10 years old now. We founded it as a group of leaders who were working individually in our own communities. It was, as I said, a super diverse group. I think our youngest founding member was 21. Our oldest was 72. Our founding members included women of trans experience, non-English speaking women, women with hearing impairments. It was a very diverse group, and also women who had been born outside the U.S. And we came together for sort of a 3-day founding convening to kind of strategize around, assess what was going on in our communities and nationally, share strategies with each other, what we were learning. And fundamentally, when we left that meeting, we said we need to work together to build a collective unified voice. There's nobody speaking for us nationally at the national level. And so that's how Positive Women's Network was formed. And I think that's how many networks get formed, whether it's at a local level or a national level or even a global level. And part of what we were responding to was the fact that many of us had been, even as individual activists and leaders and advocates, we had often felt tokenized, unsupported. We often were being asked to speak on behalf of, to provide a perspective on behalf of women living with HIV. And we were being asked to do that without having any sort of process to really consult with other women living with HIV. And so it was sort of assumed that, whoever's at the table is representing a particular perspective. And often that's used to really silence voices, especially voices from communities that tend to be left out of decision making. And so much of what we were founded to do was to really flip these scripts around who's in power, how power is held. When we looked at national leadership, even of women living with HIV back in 2008, we didn't see folks who represented the women who are most impacted by the epidemic in the United States. So we didn't see women of trans experience well represented in leadership. We didn't see Black women well represented in leadership. We didn't see low-income women well represented in, any of the sort of like policy and decision-making spaces that were happening. And we didn't see non-English speaking folks represented either. And so this is sort of why Positive Women's Network USA was formed and has continued to have internal commitments around ensuring that those communities most impacted by the epidemic are actually centered throughout our organization. You can go to the next slide, please. So recently we went through a strategic planning process, and we kind of elevated a few new pieces of work that we're going to be doing, including centering racial justice more explicitly, a membership engagement model. So this is really recognizing that we are a national membership body of women and folks with trans experience from across the U.S. We currently have chapters that are organized statewide groups of women living with HIV in 6 states. We also have 19 state leads that are basically lead advocates, and you can find all of this on our website if you want to connect with these folks and figure out where they are. But we also wanted to be able to engage with our national membership body. And so we're developing and rolling out a new membership engagement model. We also shifted to a more explicit power building and base building model, which means we realized and understood that we were organizing far beyond women living with HIV. We're organizing other folks who share our values and our vision and who are aligned on our policy agenda, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And we also integrated electoral organizing because we understood that we couldn't disconnect our issue-based campaigns that we were working on from an electoral strategy. Next slide, please. So this is just a really kind of ugly and simple organizational chart for you. What I really want you to see here is that we are led by women living with HIV throughout the US. And so we have a mandate that our board of directors is and always will be women and folks of trans experience living with HIV. That's 100% of our board. Also, will always be a majority of our staff. And also that our executive director will always be a woman or person of trans experience living with HIV. So we have, currently our staff are majority women living with HIV, majority folks of color, our work groups, our member work groups, and we have several of those where anyone who identifies as a PWN member, which means basically a woman or person of trans experience living with HIV who chooses to be a member, can participate in our ongoing work groups. And these work groups meet monthly. We do policy work through those work groups. We also organize through those work groups. We do strategic communications through those work groups. And we also do a lot of leadership development through those work groups. Next slide, please. So I think I sort of talked about this. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So what do we work on? Well, we work on a range of things, and I just wanted to give you sort of a flavor of some of the different work we do. Our work is very intersectional, and we do everything from sort of very traditional advocacy, like calling your legislators on an issue, and providing public testimony in meetings and preparing and supporting women living with HIV to do that kind of advocacy, to direct action, like taking over the state legislature. We've had multiple members be involved in a range of issues over the last couple of years, especially in this administration, where we understand that we're all literally fighting for our lives. And so we've been very active on protecting the Affordable Care Act, also on immigration issues. We have a number of members in Texas who have been working with some of the detention centers in Brownsville, going and providing support and witnessing what's happening there. And then we have a summit every couple of years, a National Leadership Summit for Women Living with HIV. That's what you're seeing in the middle here, Speak Up 10 Years Fierce. That was a 3.5-day leadership skills building summit. So, we do really different types of work, but it's all aligned around our values and our policy agenda, which you can find on our website. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a list of exactly what we do. We build and nurture leadership. We discuss and analyze policy from the perspective of folks who are going to be most impacted, right, by those policies. We mobilize on issues that impact our community, organize to turn out our vote, and to make sure that our constituents, our members, are educated about what's on their ballots, and understand how to impact the election process. And then we also do strategic communications that are designed to end all forms of stigma and to uplift most impacted communities as experts. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. And then what do we advocate for? Well, we updated our policy agenda recently in consultation with our members. So all of our work, all of our decisions are made in consultation with our membership. So in order to update our policy agenda, we convened what we call the policy agenda squad. That was a mix of members and a couple of staff to support them. We did a member survey. We did a number of listening sessions with our members, both in person and over the phone and virtually. We did topical listening sessions as well as population-specific listening sessions. And based on all of that, we developed and released a new updated intersectional policy agenda this summer. And these are 6 kind of buckets of policy priorities. So we advocate for economic justice for people living with HIV, for trans rights, safety, and justice, sexual and reproductive health rights and justice, ending criminalization in all forms, and we advocate for universal health care. And you can read about these and what they mean specifically at this link on the slide here. Each of these represents sort of a bucket, and we have specific recommendations about legislation and types of action that can be taken both at the federal and state level to advance each of these goals. And so our policy agenda is both, kind of responsive to the current political moment, recognizing that we're fighting to protect a lot of what we have, but also it's a transformative agenda that doesn't believe that the systems currently in place are designed to serve our communities, the communities we represent. And so our policy agenda looks beyond those systems and into creating alternative systems and dismantling what needs to be dismantled. Next slide, please. So you can be involved in Positive Women's Network, whether you want to join as a member or as an ally. Go to our website, you can sign up, and we do send out, pretty regular communications, lots of opportunities to be involved through different kinds of skills building, webinars, calls to action, and we would love to have you all involved in us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. So up next, we have Cecilia Chung from the Positively Trans Network.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to some. And thank you for inviting us to be part of this presentation. So next slides, please. So Positively Trans, as you can see, is the first of its kind constituent-led program in the United States to focus specifically on increasing advocacy and empowerment by and for transgender people living with HIV, especially transgender women of color living with HIV. In some ways, I just want to preface by saying that we are in a different stage of a development compared to the other three networks that have just presented. Although we definitely participate in the other networks, but our goal really is, to create a space for trans women and trans men of color living with HIV to come together and to really develop and uplift their voices and leadership. And by creating that space, like we invite those who are really intentionally partnering with us or who is interested to partner with us to approach us instead of us, going to approach different organizations. Next slide, please. And so primarily the focus for Positively Trans is about improving health conditions, and also part of Positively Trans currently is one part of what we do at the Transgender Law Center. And so for us, like we primarily focus on community leadership, like individual stories and individual plan, community strategies. I can talk a little bit about that later. Developing indicators, advocate for policy change, looking at quality improvement for HIV care, and also to advocate for more protections and more access to transition and HIV-related services. Next slide, please. So it's really actually very simple. The way that we're basing, like our work are on these four basic buckets. One is data, by really gathering the evidence, to develop our collective voice, as a national voice and also as like local community voices. And we also provide workshops to help community members to learn how to tell their stories and develop a short story arc, in the video format, and how to control the story. And hopefully I will have enough time to show you one of them. And the third is leadership. Part of what we do is very similar to what PWN USA does, except because we don't really have like real specific structure at the moment, so all the leadership that we're doing is about skill building. We have partners, in the past couple of years with ANMAC, for instance, at the block training, which is like building leadership of color living with HIV, and we were the partner for the national leadership training for transgender women of color living with HIV. And we also do other types of training, such as community organizing, strategic communications, and data literacies. And we are planning to do a big Positively Trans Summit in 2020, where we will have all the previous participants of different workshops and projects come together to attend 3 days intensive skill building workshops. And lastly, of course, is advocacy. By developing their voice, we also help to to elevate, their visibilities, so that they have been participating in various advocacy opportunities, including, having meetings, with CDC and the White House ONAP when it was still under the Obama administrations, to talk about the service gap and also policy gap. And also we also do some advocacy around funders, educations, to help change the way funders look at supporting trans-led organizations, and also create a different models of collecting like proposals from the trans-led organizations. Next slide, please. And so in summary, this is what we have accomplished so far. Like we have formed this first of its kind network in the nation, promote trans leaders of color living with HIV, and building the capacity through needs assessment, digital stories, and skill buildings. Currently, we are up to 75 members and growing, and we have a total of about 30. Actually, that number has changed. It's 35 digital stories, including some Spanish speaking stories. We have produced 3 national reports, and what currently is in the work for the coming years is producing 3 local reports for Detroit, New Orleans, and South Florida. And also we will partner with 3 communities, like local communities, that includes New York, Mississippi, and Florida, to help them develop their community strategic plan for this coming year. Next slides, please. So these are just like some of the pictures of like our members participating in various events, including, USCA, the Positive Women's Speak Out Summits, and also the International AIDS Conference in Amsterdam. Next slides. And if anyone is interested in learning more about what we do, please feel free to contact me. And if you actually know of someone who is trans, person of color living with HIV, and who might be interested in our digital story workshop, please have them contact us so we can put them on the list to invite, for the future. And since we have a little bit of time left, I'd like to show you one of the digital stories that we have produced of a trans youth of color living with HIV from New Orleans, and her name is Star. Thanks.
That they needed me to be a strong man for them. This is how my full-time acting role as a straight man began. This job paid me. It paid me with comfort, safety, unconditional love, male privilege, and a strong family connection. But also, it included severe depression, suicidal thoughts, and little to no time off. I was 30 years old when I finally gained the courage to quit my acting role. I came out to my family as a trans woman. Many were devastated, and I lost a lot of support. Shortly after, my father passed. before having the chance to accept me. This tragedy added to our suffering. After quitting this job, it wasn't long until I had to start prostituting to survive. Homelessness, rape, gun violence, and prostitution suddenly became my new reality. But music is my outlet to express my emotion, and also the platform that I use to bring awareness to the trans and gay struggle. I always think about my family and the families of others like me. My perception of what was ahead was always blurred by a thick fog. But this year, after my last unsuccessful suicide attempt, I see the fog is finally clearing, and I can see that what lies behind it is beautiful. I just needed the strength to get up and walk through the fog. I am finally on my feet. This is not a success story, but yes, I do have hope.
Okay, thank you for that video, Cecilia. I'd like to open it up right now to any questions or comments. Feel free to raise your hand, or you can type them in the chat or question box. We'll give everyone about a couple of minutes to do this. Hi, Alberto. I see you have your hand raised, so I unmuted you if you'd like to speak into the line and ask your question. Alberto? Okay, I think we lost him. We do have one question from Jesus. He typed, what happened when not only pharmaceuticals but agencies and organizations are creating stigma around a specific community, or when agencies and organizations are not adapting to our changing demographics? So I will let any one of our presenters answer this question.
Could you paste the question into the chat box just so?
Yeah, of course. Let me see. Hey, Sable, can you type the question and paste it into the all chat box window, please? Thank you. So we also have a question from Alexa. She says, my name is Alexa Rodriguez, and I have many identities in my skin, being a brown, trans, Latina, HIV positive immigrant woman. How can we become together to work as one? And this is open to any of our panelists or presenters.
Okay, thanks. So I see a few questions. I think I didn't quite capture the first one. If somebody could paste it into the chat box, that would be very helpful. And then I see a question about, are these groups already in DC? I would say some of us have some DC presence. We work together pretty closely, which is really great. So the Reunion Project, Zero, Positively Trans, PWN, we do work together a lot. Often we don't have the resources to be at every meeting that's happening in DC, but we try to represent each other where possible, or advocate for each other to get to meetings in DC as well. We also organize together through an entity called the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus, which is a national coalition of all of the PLHIV networks. And I missed the question about stigma. I don't know if somebody could repeat it. About organizations that are stigmatizing people or the changing demographics.
Yeah, so while that happens, maybe I can answer Alexa's questions about how she can get involved. So Alexa, thank you for joining this webinar, and I'm glad you called, and I'm glad you're part of this. So part of what we're hoping to do is to really, for Positively Trans, to build a really big list of like transgender people of color living with HIV, and we are planning our first ever retreat next year around the time when the National Trans Health Summit happened, which would be in April of 2019. And hopefully by then, you know, like we would be able to really get more of like the emerging leaders such as yourself to get together and, you know, share with them, you know, some of the work that we have done so far. And I'm pretty sure that you know most of the works that we are doing. And like Nana said, you know, like one of the things that we are actually part of is the USPL HIV Caucus. And we currently have a what is that called again, Nana? We have one of the seats, membership seats, you know, that is specifically for Positively Trans. And Ariana Lynn, you know, a trans Latina living with HIV from South Florida, is currently representing us on the caucus. And hopefully, you know, like this will continue our involvement with other networks and also participate in some of these activities. And also we're hoping that by continue doing what we do, we can share the stories, you know, like with our partners, so that, you know, like being mindful that we won't be able to in all places at all times, that our partners can bring some of these stories with them to the meetings or conferences they attend.
Great, thank you. And I want to be mindful to our presenters' time. So at this time, we will close up the question section. We will follow up with any questions, and we will also circulate the PowerPoint slides so you can follow up with the presenters directly as well. I want to take some time to say thank you again to our presenters, and thank you for everyone for joining. If any of you are attending the Biomedical Summit in Los Angeles next week, we look forward to seeing you. Other than that, thank you and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.